Introduce yourself in the chat. Um, I use he, his pronouns, and it's our standard practice with the working group and the coalition to start with the land acknowledgement. So I want to start by saying, as we gather for this virtual meeting, we pause to acknowledge the indigenous people whose ancestral lands we each occupy, no matter where we are joining from. These lands have been home to Native nations since long before colonization, and their stewardship of the natural world continues to this day. We recognize the enduring relationship that indigenous communities have with land, water, and all living things. We honor their resilience, leadership, and deep knowledge, especially in efforts to protect and restore nature, advance environmental justice, and respond to the climate crisis. We also acknowledge the story of our public lands, parks, and green spaces is intertwined with histories of dispossession, exclusion, and marginalization, not only of indigenous peoples, but also of Black, Latino, immigrant, and low-income communities who've too often been denied access to nature and decision-making power over it. So today, and as every day that we are able to gather as a group, we commit to working in partnership with communities who have been displaced and marginalized, and to upholding everyone's right to a healthy, just, and nature-rich future. So today is this is the final webinar in our 4-part webinar series. Last fall, the working group under Christopher's leadership, my co-lead Christopher Ramirez's leadership, decided it needed to really focus on extreme weather and its disproportionate impact. So our first webinar really focused on the science behind extreme weather and rising temperatures. The second webinar focused on local stories and lifting up frontline communities and solutions they are implementing at home on the ground. Our third webinar was on a variety of resources that could be used at various levels. And today we are joined by a great group of presenters, and we're going to focus on local, state, and federal policies to cool our parks, schoolyards, and communities. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. I think as many of you know on this call, extreme heat is now one of the deadliest climate threats we face, worsening each year and disproportionately impacting neighborhoods that have long been underserved and underinvested in. And these are often the same communities with the least access to trees, parks, and other natural infrastructure that can provide shade, cooling, and relief. And so today, we are going to hear from leading organizations such as Open Lands, American Forests, where I work, the Children in Nature Network, where I'm honored to be a board member, and Senator Ruben Gallego's office, who has done amazing work for years in the House of Representatives and now in the United States Senate, leading on legislation that addresses rising temperatures and a host of other challenges that we're facing today. And so, this work has never been more important. I think it's really critical that look at possible solutions at every level of government, federal, state, and local. And so we're actually going to start in the inverse with local, state, and then federal. And these policies are really critical to protecting public health, strengthening our infrastructure, and reducing economic risks. They're also natural climate solutions like trees and green space are proven cost-effective strategies that not only cool neighborhoods and reduce flooding, but also improve air quality, physical and mental health, social well-being, and the list goes on. And I don't think I need to tell really the folks on this call this, because many of you all are doing this work at various levels. And so we know this current administration has threatened a lot of the federal programs that support this work, grant programs, technical assistance. They've removed a lot of the tools that folks were previously able to use and access to really identify where we need to invest in these natural climate solutions. And so, again, this work has never been more urgent, and we're going to hear from a great group of panelists who are doing this work at multiple levels. So I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank our presenters who will introduce themselves and tell you more about themselves. But just quickly our presenters, we're going to start with Alma Olivaria Gallegos from Open Lands, talking about local policy. We'll then hear from Elena Tucker at American Forests, who's going to talk about local tree ordinances and a number of other things. Elena has a vast portfolio of work that she leads at American Forests. We'll hear from David Beard with the Children in Nature Network about revitalizing America's schoolyards at the state level as well as at the federal level. And then we will hear last from Emma Reedy, who I've had the privilege of working with for years. And again, Senator Ruben Gallego has been one of the leaders in Congress in terms of addressing these critical issues that face communities. Um, and so with that, I do want to, I'm sorry, turn it over to Christopher to just talk about the America the Beautiful for All Coalition. And then I'll mention quickly our working group, and then we'll jump into the presenters. So Christopher.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joel. Good morning, everybody. Buenos dias. My name is Christopher. I use they or he pronouns. I'm on the unceded lands of the Tiwa and Caris people in central New Mexico, Albuquerque. I've been involved with the America the Beautiful for All Coalition with the organization that I lead in Albuquerque called Together for Brothers, where one of our focuses is on outdoor equity and access to equitable outdoor recreation for most impacted communities, including low-income and communities of color. Being involved with the coalition since 2022, which has been great, right? Connected to the Biden administration's efforts for America the Beautiful for All, and then also, right, which is a 30 by 30, a commitment to 30 by 30, 30% of our land being protected by 2030, but also the Justice 40 initiative was really about bringing equity into the equation. So the America the Beautiful for All coalition is a coalition that fights for justice at all levels of policy, making for healthy and accessible lands and safe waters for all communities. I've been part of the Urban Parks and Green Space work group since 2022. And then since 2024, I have been the co-lead along with Joel. And one of the last things I want to lift up about the coalition is there's a real strong value in bringing together grassroots local communities and grass tops, federal, national organizations in DC and also in state capitals and in our local communities to make sure that we're all collaborating and working together. And so please check out the website. I'm going to drop the link into the chat right now so that you can see that. And please join the coalition. There's a great listserv. There are other work groups besides Urban Parks and Green Space, although Joel and I have to say, right, Joel, that we think our working group is pretty great. We have biweekly meetings that we encourage you to also potentially check out. But the last thing I just want to say again is why I'm excited about the speakers today and about the webinar series is that we're really talking about how we are making sure that equity is part of the conversation when we're thinking of extreme weather and our urban parks, green spaces, and schoolyards in our communities across the country. And so please check out the website for more information. So excited for the speakers today. And Joel, thank you so much for taking the lead on moderating.
Yes, no, thank you. Christopher's been doing yeoman's work as the co-lead of this working group. I went a little out of order. I should have talked about the working group before introducing the speakers, but we again are so thankful for our presenters and the time they've taken. And so with that, I'm going to kick it over to Alma from Open Lands.
Hi, thank you all so much for having me. I'm really pleasure to be here and honored to be invited. I do have a few slides today, so I just have sent out a request to share, and I'll put them up briefly. My name is Alma Olavarria Gallegos. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at Open Lands. I'm a policy and advocacy associate at Open Lands, and I'm going to start sharing my slides. So let me see if I can present. Oh, wait, it's not that. Here we go. Could I get confirmation that people can see this well? Great. So this is a photo of some of the work we do at Open Lands. Open Lands is a nonprofit. We started in 1963, and we're a certified land trust. We aim to protect the natural and open space of northeastern Illinois and the surrounding region. So that's up from Wisconsin down to Indiana. And we ensure cleaner air and water, protect natural habitats, and help balance and enrich people's lives. Our main city in that region is the city of Chicago. We're based out of Chicago. We've been working in Chicago for 62 years now. And when we can't do large landscape conservation in Chicago because of the urban environment, a lot of our conservation focuses on tree plantings. It focuses on green stormwater infrastructure like trees and other tools to reduce flooding. And we also focus on education of teachers and education of students on nature and bringing nature into the classroom and into your life. So today I'm going to be talking a lot about tree planting. One of the amazing things that Open Lands has done over the years is we have a tree keeper program, and we're building advocates for trees. So an advocate is a person who argues a cause in support or defense of a person, group, or cause. And we have these classes. It's an 8-week course called a tree keeper course, and it looks a little bit like what you see below, of 50 or more people in a classroom learning about trees for 8 weeks. An essential part of this class is an advocacy course, which is taught about how to be an advocate for trees, and it covers all different types of advocacy work. It covers civic advocacy work, which is making change through voting and legislation and lobbying. It also covers educating others, service provision, going out and cutting or pruning or planting trees directly, and organizing with your community. So through these classes and through our network of tree keepers or who are volunteers on the ground every day planting trees, engaging with their urban forest canopy, we've learned a lot as an organization. We learn where some of our issues are with our tree canopy, specifically in the city. When trees are coming out, we get on the ground knowledge from our base of tree keeper advocates, and we have people who are impassioned and go and talk to their elected officials about advocacy. So nothing really can be done without our advocates and without this base of people who are working in our tree canopy every day, who are impassioned about it and who understand how to talk to their elected officials. Over the time at Open Lands, these tree keepers and our tree advocates have brought some of the best wins for our tree canopy. And it doesn't happen just in Chicago, it happens in the surrounding region. In cities above Chicago, north of Chicago, like Evanston, there's been some really great tree advocacy work that has originated and was really groundswelled from our tree advocates that work on the ground every day. In the city of Chicago, we've faced a different kind of monster. There's the urban forestry in the city of Chicago. The urban forest is managed by many different entities. So our public trees are managed both by the Bureau of Forestry, but also by Chicago Department of Transit, and also by our public parks. So each department manages a different set of public trees, and there's no comprehensive way to really collectively look at trees. And at the same time, we have different departments, like our Department of Water, touching trees when they're putting in water pipes. And so there's a lot of different departments that come and affect trees, and not just one single entity that manages and maintains all of the trees within the region. Because of this, and because of our tree canopy decreasing over the years, there was a lot of advocacy to create an urban forestry advisory board. And this board was supported by our tree keepers on the ground. They went out and talked to their elected officials. In Chicago, we have aldermen, so that's our city council. They talked to their city councilors, and they established an urban forestry advisory board. The board meets quarterly, and in addition, there's monthly working groups. And Open Lands is an organization, we highly encourage our tree keepers and our volunteer base to attend, to continue providing that pressure for this board. So because there was such a variety of issues within the city, it was very difficult to tackle the issues on an individual basis, like what was happening in other cities. The Urban Forestry Board has been a tool. Here I'm showing just the board website. It's been a tool that has been helpful, but it's definitely not the end step that we want to get to. The board is an advisory board for the city of Chicago. it's tasked to investigate and offer recommendations on tree-related issues. There are different members who sit on the board, from different departments that I spoke about before, the Department of Transportation and the Department of Water. Department of Planning is also involved. So it's a unique opportunity to bring forward together all of these different departments that have touched different parts of the city, a different part of the city canopy. And it also brings out external experts, and Open Lands has one of a representative from Open Lands sitting on the board as well. So it's this really unique space that finally brings together all of these different departments that touch our trees to impact change. And it's a fantastic place to learn about trees, learn about what's being done, and to plan together collectively within the city to make change. So I'm not sure where my time is. I'm trying to speak fast, but
No, you're right on. It's perfect timing. And so yeah, you have another minute if there's anything you wanted to add.
yeah, so our Urban Forestry Advisory Board is advertised always through our website for our volunteers. We always have tree advocates coming and speaking directly to the people who are making decisions about the tree canopy. Right now, we're working on a heritage tree ordinance that was built into the original ordinance that was passed that established this board. So the original law that was written and passed with a lot of help from our volunteers, that law says they have to work on a heritage tree program. So that's the program we're working on right now. We're bringing in experts from different parts of the city and beyond to talk about what heritage tree protections look like in other big cities, similar to Chicago, and in other small areas around Illinois with similar weather patterns, and presenting that information to a collective group, a working group that is working on consolidating recommendations. And we've already had some recommendations go up to the city council too. So we're excited about the progress made there. It's definitely not the end all be all. I think a board is a great way to move forward some progress, but it's not everything we want to see, and we're really excited about having it as a tool to continue moving forward those changes we really want to see within the city of Chicago, which is historically so difficult to navigate with all the different moving pieces that Chicago has.
Thank you, Alma. That was wonderful. Reminder to folks, if you have questions, please throw them in the chat. So we'll have a guided Q&A, then followed by open Q&A after all the speakers present. And so again, thank you on my notes. Chicago really has emerged as a national leader in terms of urban forestry and greening, thanks to groups like Open Lands and the work that you're doing collaboratively with others. And so the next presenter is Elena Tucker from American Forests. So take it away, Elena.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Joel. Can you see my screen okay? Okay, awesome. Yeah, that was a great segue. Thank you, Alma. Amazing work that you're doing, and so exciting to hear about how the Heritage Tree Ordinance is driving the kind of work plan of the advisory board in Chicago. I'm actually here to talk about local ordinances today. My name is Elena Tucker, as Joel said, and I get to work with Joel at American Forests. I lead strategy and partnerships for our tree equity team, and super excited to be here today. So thank you so much for the invitation. One of the parts of my work, which I wanted to make sure I mentioned, is that I lead the Tree Equity Alliance, of which Green Latinos is a member. And we love working with Green Latinos, Groundwork USA, and the 1890 Universities Foundation, because together, similar to this coalition, but more focused on tree equity, we are advocating for tree equity with a unified voice alongside these partners. And we are driving resources and best practices to the field through our Inflation Reduction Act funding totaling over $100 million. So I wanted to share that is an amazing partnership that we get to, that gets us to be able to collaborate with members of this group. So thank you. Joel already shared about this, but extreme heat and community health are inextricably tied. And it's a matter of life or death. And so I won't spend too much time, as I know maybe you heard about this in a previous webinar, but the data that can be developed to share access to information on shade and tree canopy can really drive the decisions that are used to develop strategies around addressing extreme heat. And so things like the new shade map that American Forests and UCLA developed are really these tools that will enable local decision makers and policymakers to make decisions around around where to prioritize investments and ordinances and policy. So I want to share just a little bit about how ordinances help cities to grow shade. You already heard that a little bit from Alma, but there are a lot of things that live in policy that then unlock the opportunity and the requirement ultimately to create shade in cities. And so I'll speak just to a few of them that I see as most valuable. I always want to talk about ordinances and policy very clear-eyed from the beginning. Like, you can pass a law, and that takes a lot of work from advocates like those that work in Chicago. But your ordinances are nothing without the enforcement power and capacity to actually do that work. And so I'm going to talk about where this can live within policy, but just always be thinking when you're thinking about how to advocate for policy that you need the capacity for enforcement and resourcing of those activities that you outline in your ordinances. So with that, the first and I think most powerful thing that can exist in an ordinance is how to unlock the financing strategies for your urban forestry program. And so things like tree funds can be established that create revenue generation for your work through permit reviews, through fee and lieu for developers, or when they remove trees, you create some kind of fee structure or fine structure for this tree fund that can support your work. The other thing that's really critical that ordinances do is it says who's responsible for trees in the city. Is it that urban forest advisory board in Chicago? Is it an urban forester? Is it an arborist? Is it a shared model like in Seattle where many different agencies within the city government are responsible for the urban forestry program and the trees? That's really critical to outline that so that people know who's in charge. Ordinances can require best practices around tree care, contractor requirements, program standards. How often are you going to assess your tree canopy at the city? Can outline all of those best practices and standards. And ordinances can prevent malfeasance through identifying, what happens if you remove a tree on public property, or if you vandalize a tree on public property, or if you remove a tree on private property without permission. And then kind of separate from, but related, is how ordinances and the zoning code can guide development in cities, specifically around tree canopy. And I know a lot of you probably live in communities like mine that are experiencing this kind of tension between development and development pressure and housing affordability and tree canopy. So I always say that like these types of development related policies should be done in tandem with the development community. And so that you can reach a common goal. Do you want housing and tree canopy? Because those things are not in tension necessarily, but you have to make these decisions together. So things around tree protection during the construction process, but also tree preservation during the development process on land live within the zoning code. Tree planting requirements that a developer will be held to for either planting trees on site or off site of their development live within that. And then also, what types of incentives can you create to encourage developers to preserve or grow tree canopy? So some cities provide incentives that you can build higher than you would otherwise be allowed to, more density on your site if you preserve a certain amount of trees. So things like that live within ordinances. And I just want to kind of talk about some key concepts because ordinances and local policy look different everywhere. Um, Tree laws can be codified in many places of a local code, like tree protection ordinances, landscaping ordinances, development ordinances, and the zoning code, which lives actually in your comprehensive plan and as an addendum to the Muni code. Quasi policy, so not things that are necessarily passed by law, but can be adopted as if they were policy, are things like plans. So the city's comprehensive plan, an urban forest management plan, climate action plans, and then open space and green space plans. And then to make matters even more complicated, there are a lot of different types of ownership structures over trees in your city. So there's public trees that are definitively publicly owned trees. Like those, it kind of varies by city, but it's like public trees in your publicly owned lands, like parks and green space on city-owned property. But then there's things like trees on right of way. So the trees in front of homes in your city, for example, that might be like a shared ownership, or maybe they are the responsibility of the property owner, but they are owned by the city. Then there's like private property trees, which the majority of urban tree canopy, maybe like 60% of urban tree canopy on average, is on private property. So how does your code interface with the way that trees exist on that private property? And then the private properties that are specifically on land that's being developed are beholden to like different laws that I talked about earlier through the development code and zoning code. And then these are just like a bunch of different things I wanted to talk about. These are the different buckets of things that can live in maybe a tree protection ordinance. Things like authority and responsibility, what's allowable, care standards, processes, planting guidance, protecting trees like those heritage trees that were talked about earlier, and then preservation of trees and like which trees warrant preservation in a city. So I just wanted to talk about a couple of resources really quickly that we have. One is coming soon. This one on the left is going to be a toolkit, part of our tree equity handbook at American Forests, which creates kind of like a step-by-step process for evaluating your ordinances and then deciding maybe what you might want to prioritize for adoption into your tree ordinances in your city. So that's coming soon, later this fall in November. And then on the right, this is a tool resource that's already live. We partnered with the Smart Surfaces Coalition to write this policy guidance. And it's really great. It has examples of cities and their ordinances that you can refer to if you're interested in finding examples from other cities of how code is being used around urban forests. And then my last slide is just, I wanted to share about financing mechanisms because I do think that this is really related to code. A lot of these things are established in ordinances. But financing for urban forestry comes from a lot of different sources, including taxes through the general fund, bonds that you vote on as a city, stormwater fees that can be garnered through, calculations of how much stormwater runoff is being generated. Philadelphia is an example of a city that uses that as a mechanism to fund urban forestry. And then those developer incentives, fines, and fees that I talked a little bit about earlier. And then, of course, not local funding, municipal funding is not the only way to fund your work. We all kind of know that federal funding has been one way to do that in the past, but local tree nonprofits are also super important. And if you don't have one, like I think every city should, because they can leverage other types of funding through those nonprofit funding mechanisms. And then utility companies are very great partners in some cities on thinking about how to invest in trees in the right place and reduce energy demand on the grid through creating shade. And I know a lot of the policies that this coalition is working on relate to how to work with utility companies on that. So I will stop there. Thank you so much for listening, and happy to answer any questions in the chat or later in the call. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Elena. So we heard from Alma and Elena on local ordinances and policies, which we know are really important to lay the foundation for expanding urban forestry and urban green space. But those have to be leveraged in order to scale that work, has to be leveraged with state and federal policies as well. And so now we're going to hear from David Beard at the Children in Nature Network, who is working at both the state and national level on policies to revitalize America's schoolyards. So over to you, David.
Great, thank you. Well, hello everyone. My name's David Beard. I'm with the Children in Nature Network, Director of Policy and Government Affairs. I am based in Seattle, but we are a national organization, and I'm lucky enough to get to do local, state, and federal work. I don't know if we can make the presentation full screen. But so here to talk today about green and living schoolyards. For those of you that are not familiar, is there any way we can make the screen full screen? If you go to
Sorry, I didn't realize it wasn't on. Give me 1 second.
Thank you. So a green and next slide. And green and living schoolyards are these amazing opportunity to really bring in nature onto school sites. And it can be something like there's a school forest and maybe a school garden, and it can be as large as changing some of your surfaces to actually make them so green and sustainable that they take in water, they help with your stormwater management, and they just provide a place for some de-stressing and some learning to happen right at your school sites. Next slide. So just some of the impacts of green and living schoolyards, and I use those interchangeably because they are essentially the same things. I've actually been doing some work in the Southwest, so I'm leaning more into the living schoolyards because schoolyards that really take in nature might not be green. So there's lots of impacts to learning and health, but there can also be environmental sustainability impacts if you really go full scale for the full enchilada there. And then, of course, community development and health. And some of the resources that will be in chat include a toolkit on green and living schoolyards, as well as a return on investment. Denver went full throttle and also worked with their parks department to have green and living schoolyards either on school sites or at parks that are next to schools. And they saw some amazing benefits, not only to things like kids wanting to come to school more and good graduation rates, but property value increases and really just happier communities that have more green spaces that they can use out of school hours. Next slide. And again, when you're really doing this at full scale, you can see where permeable surfaces go up dramatically, and even soft surfaces that have some permeability, is that a word? Can also increase as you really decrease those blacktops and other concrete surfaces to make way for more nature and green space. All right, next slide. Let's head into policy land. Well, I want to talk about an opportunity for green and living schoolyards that is happening right as we speak. And I want to give a shout out to Green Schoolyards America and the amazing work that they've done to help make this bill come to life. Last Congress with the Living Schoolyards Act. This is the next iteration of this. I also want to shout out Trust for Public Land and the awesome advocacy work that they've been doing to elevate green and living schoolyards, which is leading us to the bill this year, the Revitalizing America's Schoolyards Act. This bill is about to be introduced, in fact, next week, and I just put a link in there so you can learn more about what's in the bill and hopefully sign on for that initial introduction. But essentially, it creates a grant program for green schoolyards, both for implementation and for planning. And also includes support for best practices and actually cataloging what are some of the best practices out there. And, let's be real, with everything happening right now at the federal level, you're like a grant program. And trust me, the chances of this bill actually passing may be small in this Congress, but it's still important to elevate the issue and to make sure that there's some attention on our needs in our schoolyards, our needs for kids' access to nature, our needs for our schools to have more tree canopies to fight against some of the intense weather that we're seeing, for including stormwater, which can be a big problem in schools across the country. And these can be designed in a way that can capture that better. And so getting this issue out there, this possibly being a part of a larger package, or this just helps us on the pathway into the next Congress where maybe we have another opportunity It's important that we keep looking at some forward-thinking legislation and keeping these conversations elevated. And we're hoping for bipartisanship on this bill. But again, I put in chat a link to sign on if you're interested, and happy to answer more questions offline on that as well. Next slide. I want to shout out the Youth Outdoor Policy Playbook as we transition a little bit now looking at state level policy where there have been some advancements on green and living schoolyards at the state level. This right here is a tool where you can actually see what's happening all across the country at any given moment in our state legislatures around all things children and nature. And we also, this tool also provides community spotlights and issue spotlights. And we have a twice a year report to say what's happening across the states, where were there some opportunities, and a little bit about what some of the advocacy look like to make that happen. Next slide. The policy playbook is supported by these amazing organizations: the North American Association for Environmental Education, NAAE, the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, and Nuestra Tierra, which is a New Mexico-based organization that does great programmatic work and great advocacy work and are supporting this national effort. Next slide. Next slide, please. All right. So what is happening out there in the lands? Well, big shout out to Colorado and Trust for Public Lands there for passing House Bill 1061, which established a $4 million program to develop community green schoolyards in their state, prioritizing underserved populations. One of the things that I want to say about this bill is that it's the second state to pass a statewide green schoolyards program, California being the first, and their urban and community forest grant program there. One thing I want to note about California, they also have funds for licensed childcare programs as well to look at building out some green park-like infrastructure and outdoor learning environments there. But one of the really cool things about what happened in Colorado is that they had a really tough budget. So they used a dedicated tax and kind of reprioritized some things within that tax to be able to fund this, which was really neat. And it was a bipartisan effort. You had a legislator from Denver and a legislator from rural southeastern Colorado, a Republican, that teamed up to pass this bill. So bipartisanship is still possible out there and maybe more possible at the state level. So big shout out to Colorado. And I also want to say at the local level, you know, we have school districts and municipalities and other partners coming together to think about how they can design green schoolyards or parks near schools to be more inclusive for kids, to be ready for kids, to have more tree canopy, to have those stormwater managements. You'll see Atlanta right there. They just signed an agreement between the city and the school district and other partners to really just be able to have more green schoolyards and tend to those schoolyards. In Milwaukee, they have a really cool approach to their green schoolyards, which is where the city, the school district, the utility district, and Reflow, which is a nonprofit that supports access to clean water for communities across Milwaukee, all came together to have green schoolyards all across the city in a multi-year plan. There's just so many great things happening at the local and state level. I don't want to lose sight of that as we think about what's happening at the federal level, and even losses of federal funding doesn't mean that there can't still be good things that can happen out there. And there are good things happening, even in bipartisanship ways. Next slide. So the action agenda, one of the things we're doing with many of our partners, including Trust for Public Lands and Green Schoolyards America, is a Green Schoolyards action agenda, a refresh to it. We had an action agenda several years ago. We're going to dust that off as we're in this new political world. And we really need you. We want to hear from you about your interest in this, what's going on out there, what we need to be thinking about as we design and grow green and living schoolyards. So it's great to be here today. I appreciate everything that you all are doing in your communities for kids, for nature, and excited to partner with you.
Thank you, David. And I think we can all use optimism in this world we're living in today. And so David's exactly right, the importance of state and local policy. And then, you know, that work continues and it's more important than ever. And at the federal level, there are reasons for optimism, again, even in a challenging environment. And so our next presenter is policy advisor to Senator Ruben Gallego and Moretti. So Senator Gallego represents, well, in the House, represented the hottest city in the country and now in the Senate representing the state of Arizona. Again, has just been a tremendous leader on federal legislation. And so I will turn it over to you, Emma.
All right, cool. Thanks, y'all. That's a really nice transition from some positive work at the state and local level to a significantly more challenging scope at the federal level of where we are. Is there a way to make the slides full screen whenever you have a second? So if there's an so I can just get started. So wanted to briefly talk about why my boss, Senator Ruben Gallego, is so involved in this space. One of the main reasons, as Joel mentioned, is that his House district, where I worked with him for 5 years, is the hottest city in the entire country. And now, not to brag, but we represent the state of Arizona, which has the first and second hottest with both Phoenix and Tucson. So this is, I mean, and I know there's a lot of debate over who's the hottest. So if anyone disagrees, apologies for that. So wanted to say that when I started with him about 5 years ago, there was a surprising, in my opinion, lack of federal policy on extreme heat, which is one of the things that we worked on, with the notable exception of a couple offices like Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman, Senator Ed Markey. Like, for the most part, there just wasn't really much work in this space. So it's been a really great opportunity to, over the last few years, see a lot of that change and to work on a bunch of bills, which I will talk about here. Would it be possible to go to the third slide that says federal policy? Cool. Okay, so I wanted to share a couple of non-exhaustive heat bills that are out there right now, in case you all want to engage on any of these with the offices you work with in Congress. And a shameless plug for myself, the first one I wanted to mention is the Excess Urban Heat Mitigation Act, which is the bill that my boss leads, which is sort of a comprehensive look at both the ways that we can keep urban heat from getting worse, like tree canopy and a lot of the things mentioned here today, and then respond to it with things like shade and tree cover and things like that. Yeah, I know it's not showing full screen. I don't have control, so I can't change it. There we go. Great. Also, I want to talk about the Extreme Heat Emergency Act, which was bipartisan last year, actually, and adds extreme heat to FEMA's list of major disaster events they can respond to, because that's not listed in there. And we've had a lot of challenges with FEMA saying, you know, we can't respond to heat despite the fact that it's the #1 weather-related cause of death. In a similar way, there's the Coordinated Federal Response to Extreme Heat Act, which looks a little bit more at the agency side of things and how they can share information and work together on preparedness, planning, and response. And then down at the bottom, just showing sort of the ways that our office has been involved. Next slide, please. Thank you. So then we have the Extreme Heat Economic Study Act, which is looking at the impacts of extreme heat on health, infrastructure, and the economy. This is important because one of the main things we hear from agencies is that they can't respond to extreme heat because they can't put numbers to it. So we're trying to get more of the experts on the ground to start looking at those things. Last week, the Asunción Valdivia Heat Illness, Injury, and Fatality Protection Act was introduced, which is more on the workforce side of things, making sure that there are federal standards to protect workers in high heat environments, especially in agricultural and construction spaces. I mean, last year, Arizona had, I think, 30 days in a row over 110 degrees, and the fact that there's no federal requirements for how workers get protected in that situation, in my opinion, is kind of crazy. And then focusing more on what you all were just talking about, the SHADE Act creates a grant program in housing and urban development to plant trees in overburdened and formerly redline communities. I remember in my early days, this is not groundbreaking for many of you, I'm sure, but I saw an overlap of my boss's district in Phoenix with the hottest temperatures and then the lowest tree cover and then the highest levels of poverty. And they were all literally just the outline of the same area. So I think recognizing that a lot of these things go together is important, and the SHADE Act is fantastic for that. Next slide, please. The Transit to Trails Act, just wanted to mention this one since y'all were talking about access to green spaces. This one promotes equitable access to parks and green spaces and public lands. It hasn't been reintroduced this year, but is a great way to sort of tie all these things together. And then obviously one of the main functions of the federal government is supposed to be appropriations, not really happening so much right now, but pushing for funding for things like the National Integrated Heat Health Information System, which is the cross-agency approach to funding. And then my boss has been really interested in the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, which helps with utility bills when it's either very hot or very cold out. And then the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, which is about access to green spaces. So that's just a couple of the things that have been on the scene. And then if we can go to the next slide. In my opinion, some of the challenges to actually passing these things, which I think have been alluded to before, obviously right now is not a great moment for bipartisanship on the federal level. So it's great to hear about it other places. We have had some bipartisan support, especially around the emergency response angle in the past. But that is dwindling as, you know, there's a lot of politicization around not only climate change, but resiliency and anything sort of related to that. So that's been really tricky. There's also really specific rules, especially on the House side, about authorizing new funding in bills. Basically, you can't do it without an offset. So it makes new grant programs like y'all have been talking about very hard. As I mentioned, regular appropriations did not happen last year. We're under a continuing resolution, which makes new funding and specific funding for things like this really hard. And then something that I have noticed is a crazy amount of seasonality and people engaging on heat. I mean, obviously the people on this call are not those people, but the increase in interest we get around heat related bills when it gets hot in Washington, D.C. is crazy. So we try and really seize the moment during the summer a lot of the time to try and get momentum on these things. But it's hard to keep it going when as soon as it cools down, a lot of people shift their focus to other things. So that's just a fun trend we've seen over the years. And then if we can go to the next slide. And then also on the agency side, wanted to mention, there's a big challenge between the agencies when we communicate with them on this about who's supposed to be in charge of heat, because it's such a nebulous and sort of cross-cutting subject. So it's hard to know who has ownership over this. As I mentioned, the Integrated Heat Health Information System in NOAA has really helped with that and sort of pointed a bunch of agencies in the right direction. Similarly, interagency communication is challenging, especially right now, given the workforce cuts that we're seeing, strained resources, again, given the funding cuts that we're seeing, and then finally staffing. The low-income home energy assistance program I mentioned a few minutes ago recently had 100% of its federal workforce cut, which is really, really hard to then administer things. So these are all things that we're trying to point to on the congressional level and say, hey, some on purpose, some maybe not on purpose, depending on how you want to interpret it. These things are really being hindered. And then next slide, please. The last thing, pass forward awareness and outreach. I mean, you all are doing a fantastic job on this, but making sure that your members of Congress are aware that, you know, this is a big problem and that you would like them to be more focused on this. We've seen a tremendous amount of success and sort of expansion of interest in this area. So this is working. In terms of working across the aisle and with a larger group of members, I would say the disaster response angle is really helpful. There's obviously people who've been very engaged in the tree space for a long time and in the climate space for a long time, but a lot of members who I think, if that's not an angle that resonates with them, saying, hey, resiliency and disaster response, we've seen a lot more people interested in that side. Obviously focusing on keeping agencies adequately staffed and funded so they can follow congressional mandates about these things. And then I think David mentioned this really well, trying to focus on wins at the state, local, and tribal levels when we're not necessarily seeing that movement in Congress. I think that, you know, you all do a fantastic job a lot of times of reaching up to the federal level. And I think one of the things that I've really encouraged people in this space to do is look towards their local leaders and the successes they've already had and how we can build on all of those. So I think that's it for me. I believe that's the last slide, and happy to answer questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you to all presenters because the timing is almost perfect. So I really appreciate all that information in a concise and still thorough way. And I just want to thank Emma again. Just I've had the privilege of being able to work with her for a number of years now, including a congressional briefing we did on extreme heat last year when then Representative Gallego worked with Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman. So that's great. So I'm going to get into some guided questions in the spirit of optimism. I do want to mention at the federal level, which is where I focus my work, there is a bipartisan extreme heat caucus now that was recently started by Representative Stanton of the Phoenix area and Representative Lawler of the Hudson Valley area right north of New York City. And the Cool Corridors Act was introduced in the House last week, which is bipartisan, led by Representative Strickland in David's neck of the woods in Tacoma, Washington, and Representative Lawler, who I just mentioned. So that is another bipartisan bill that is out there and hopefully can gain some momentum. So I'm going to actually go in reverse order for the guided questions. And it's like, Emma, your last slide kind of led into this. But the question is sort of what you and I have actually talked about this quite a few times. What is the best messaging that communities, advocates, stakeholders should be using when they're talking to their congressional leaders around federal extreme weather and equity legislation, particularly given this administration's animus towards terms like climate and equity. And so, could you talk a little bit about how you engage your counterparts, and just broadly?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, this, as a caveat, is my view of things. It's certainly not the only one. And just to put that out there, I think what I've seen have the most success, as I mentioned, is talking about resilience and energy costs and health impacts and all of the things that I think are, for some members, more visible and concrete than climate change and heat and temperature. Obviously, there are a ton of members of Congress who have been engaged on this and are really leaning into the climate change angle, which, scientifically is fantastic. But I think if we're trying to expand the tent of extreme heat, what I've seen work really well is the disaster response angle, and then also the impacts to infrastructure, the impacts to energy costs, affordability. That angle is really compelling. And then the health aspects. I mean, you cannot argue with the health aspects of extreme heat, just given the deaths and the injuries and everything that we see over the summer and that many places have seen over the summer, especially during devastating heat waves. So I think that that's one of the ways that we've sort of tried to make it more directly relevant to members across the country and sort of advocate for the fact that even if you don't think you're working on heat policy, you have been working on heat policy as you're dealing with all of these other challenges that we see. And then, yeah, I mean, as you all mentioned, it's really hot and trees help with that. And people like living in neighborhoods with trees and it helps property value and all those things. So I think bringing it down to a more concrete level that a larger coalition of people can see and experience for themselves is the way that we've had the most progress.
Thank you, Emma. And just want to reiterate one of the points you made when we're talking specifically about extreme heat. As mentioned, from Memorial Day to Labor Day, it gets a lot of press and then it sort of goes away, and we do the same thing every year. But in order to have sustainable policy solutions, we really need to treat that as a 12-month issue, particularly in places like Arizona, but really across the country with rising temperatures. We really need to do that. And so that's extremely helpful in terms of the messaging. So David, and we'll get to any questions. If you have questions, please throw them in the chat. And Christopher is doing amazing work of managing the chat and getting information out there. So David, the question for you is, who are potential partners for state or federal schoolyard greening that folks should be collaborating with that may not already be at the table?
That's a great question. One of the things I mentioned, and somebody else mentioned in their presentation too, your utilities districts, your water districts, might not at first blush seem like partners on this, but when you really do this really cool, like really broad look at greener living schoolyards, because of the storm water management impacts and some of the other utility impacts, not only are they good partners to bring on in thoughts of how you would design something, but they can also possibly use or secure other resources, whether that's state or federal grants around utilities, or whether that is even fees. In fact, that the fee structure, I'm not gonna act like I know more than I do about the fee structure on stormwater management, but both Milwaukee and even Seattle has considered this, where some of the fees can go into helping fund the green schoolyards. So there's just so many, if you can think about it dynamically, and even better if you can think about it across a district, the more impact and the more cost savings in a way you can have, and the more funding you're going to bring in. So that's one partner. Another partner that somebody had mentioned are your organizations that involve trees or urban canopies and forests, are another great way. And TPL has done this really well, bring in the community, whether that's kids and families. Actually, one of the previous webinars for America the Beautiful had some folks out in Los Angeles where the kids were designing how they wanted it to look, and where their shade structures can be that can also be play areas. Bring the kids in. The kids have some of these answers too, and they are also really cool partners. And this was elementary. This wasn't middle or high school. So whatever the age is, bring them in as well.
Thank you, David. Tremendous stuff. Elena, so the next question is for you. Beyond the helpful advice that you've already shared, Can you elaborate on some additional tips for community partners who want to collaborate with cities or counties for tree ordinances to address equity in extreme weather?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think kind of what Alma shared actually around the models for advocacy, using these kind of community groups that can coalesce around common interests that are interdisciplinary are really key here. So some cities call them advisory boards, some cities call them, you know, climate action, advisory boards. Some of them say they're a tree board, whatever they're called. Just having these interdisciplinary groups to create aligned goals and values and aspirations, I've found are really effective. And so I would just say, you know, people who work in the city who have the power to kind of push forward these initiatives need sometimes outside support and pushing. And sometimes, honestly, I think we all know like advocacy gets a little bit hazy of who can do advocacy, who can push for policy, and who's best suited. And so I would definitely recommend in your community to try to power map for your community who has different abilities. And our tree equity handbook on policy will include an exercise around that that's coming in November. But just really recommend looking at an interdisciplinary group to be advancing initiatives in a city with representatives that represent broad types of ownership over trees and responsibility over trees, but also who bring different capacities and resources to the table.
Excellent. Thank you, Elena. We are doing really well on time. So please, there's some great information coming in the chat. And if you have additional questions or information, please just continue to share that. And so last guided question is for Alma. Thank you for waiting for the reverse order. And so what lessons have been learned about best practices for local tree policies and their impact on in the most impacted communities? Just
Yeah, so many lessons there. Thank you for the question. One thing that we've seen in Chicago is that our tree management system has been highly responsive. So that means that trees are getting managed based off of people who are calling in and complaining. And that has led to a lot of tree inequity in the city of Chicago. We recently moved to a grid pruning system, which means that instead of being responsive, there's a proactive way of going through the city in a systemic way to check on trees throughout the city. And some trees haven't been touched in a very long time because those communities are not calling or do not have the same avenues or understanding of the same avenues or the time or space to call and have somebody come and check on their trees. So that tree pruning system has saved this grid pruning system saves the city a bunch of money. There's so much more efficiency now, but there's also an ability to equitably address the tree canopy within the city. There's a ton of other examples too. Tree planting has to be accompanied with education. That's a lot of the work that Open Land does. But our partners are doing it too. When we go out and put a tree in front of somebody's house, a public tree, educating the homeowner that even though it's a public tree owned by the public, if that homeowner has or the renters around have a investment in that tree, then they'll be taking care, they'll be watering, they'll be making the calls if there's an issue, they'll be checking up on it during a drought. And there's a lot of new programs within the city that really do that education, that heavy education in the most tree the least tree canopy communities. And so that has made a huge difference. You can see that the trees being planted now are having higher success rates. And that's what we're seeing from those programs. It's very important to do that tree education so people know this tree is not just here for an aesthetic value, or that the leaves are the birds that are pooping on the cars because they're in the trees. That is all taken into the bigger context of this tree is helping my utility bills decrease, and this tree is helping my kids breathe cleaner because the air is polluted, or this tree is helping decrease the flooding in the basement. So a lot of that education is really central to changing the perceptions and then allowing the trees into the neighborhoods. And then I would just say heritage tree protections is another huge equity tool, because we know that in areas where there is a low tree canopy, sometimes it's 1 or 2 or 3 big trees that have been there for generations and generations, that if they're removed would impact an entire region at a different scale than an area with higher tree canopy. So having a heritage tree protection can really do wonders to making sure that the tree canopy remains more equitable, increases that tree equity as we're waiting for younger trees to grow too.
Amazing, amazing. So before we open it up for questions, we do have a question that was submitted previously, and this is open to anybody. Maybe David, if you want to take the first shot, but open to any of the panelists. And so the question is, does the indoor maximum temperature work extend to schools, childcare, and prisons?
This is actually might be a little bit out of my depth because I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know about school districts is I highly doubt there is a requirement. There is often guidance that states will provide. And in fact, here in my state, in Washington, there is a guidance around air temperature in schools. There's even guidance around noise volume. But the extent that, and in fact, this was brought up, I think it's by is it Amar and Lana, the enforcement of these things is where the I'd say rubber meets the road. It's where the leaf meets the ground. That's why it's really important. And it's not out to play gotcha, right? It's about how do we work with schools. I'm not out to punish schools, especially right now, but how do we work with them when we think about temperature indoor and outdoor? Even as green schoolyards, we really are about the grounds, but we can also think about the buildings themselves and more efficient HVAC systems, for example, that can also help with clean air and reducing temperature. And I'll just say, as you're looking at school building heat and things like that, this is why we need money for just school infrastructure anyways, to come from every level of government, because our schools don't just have a bunch of money lying around to address this. So all that is to say, I don't think there's a requirement. I do think we should be working with our schools to think about indoor and outdoor temperature and what we can do about that, and us all working together to come up with creative solutions.
Thank you. Yeah, that did not sound out of your depth at all to me. And I mean, I think that is a really important question that I had not thought about previously, with OSHA obviously being one of the regulations that's being threatened at this time. That is a really important question to dive into. Any of the other panelists have any thoughts on that? All right. And there is, I think, a request to the extent you're comfortable, if you could share your contact information. I know folks would love that to follow up. There's a lot of folks doing a lot of great work supporting this work at the local, state, and federal level. And so, we just, again, are thankful for everyone being here and to continue to do that really, really important work at all levels and across levels. So again, we're actually doing really well on time. And so I will open it up to any questions in the chat, or if folks want to just ask their question. Yeah, go ahead, Christopher.
So there's an open question from Lindsay, and she's interested in what resources are available to plant trees in her community. And there's some other background information, but I don't know if one of the panelists, Joel, can help us with what are some funding resources for communities looking to plant trees in their communities.
Thank you for lifting that up. And so, yeah, I don't know where that question was coming from in terms of local sources, but I know Elena, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it varies. It varies a lot. So unfortunately, I don't always know what sources are available. Lindsay, I see you asked the question and you're raising your hand, so I'm not sure if you can come off mute, but I'm happy to talk to this more.
I can just say that some of the places you might start, I'm not familiar with your community, but the arboretums, if there's arboretums around, and also the wastewater management, like generally they might be good places to start if there's heavy flooding in your area. Open lands is a land trust, but not all land trusts does tree work and conservation work.
Yeah, and I know, Lindsay, feel free to put the clarifying part in the chat if you can't come off mute. I have an HOA that I am the president of, and so I know the challenges of managing tree planting on on HOA land. But one of the opportunities that I see in HOAs is to come up with tree planting plans that can build buy-in from your community, from your residents and owners. So I, for one, am literally in the middle of doing one of those for my community because our trees are dying and they were never planted in the right place to begin with. And so I found that by building that kind of vision for what we want to see, including like, hey, this is where we want to plant trees in the future. This is the impact that it would have. You can use iTree to be able to create impact estimates for how much those trees will save you in terms of money and stormwater runoff and et cetera, et cetera. So would just recommend coming up with an HOA wide plan for tree planting. And then that can also be attractive to funders who might be interested in supporting that work. So without knowing enough about your HOA, I can do that. And then also I would just say, yeah, from a security camera perspective, I would move the cameras. I would plant the trees where they're needed and move the cameras. I have the same issue, and we will be moving some cameras eventually. So
Thank you for that, Elena. She didn't mention that she's neighbors with Warren Buffett, so I don't know if he's part of your
he has a
HOA.
lot of cameras and a lot of trees, so maybe he could like, support some of this.
And a lot of money. Maybe he could fund
Yeah.
some. Yes. Okay.
Hey, Joel, I just a heads up, Joel. I did find a resource from Rhode Island about best practices for homeowner alliances, HOAs, and tree planting that I dropped into the chat. So, Elena, maybe you could also take a look at that and see, and maybe we could follow up with looking at other resources. Thanks for the question, Joel.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead,
Oh,
Elena.
just one really quick question to Emma. Wanted to share one of our place-based staff in Phoenix actually talks a lot about how HOAs control a lot of the tree canopy in Phoenix. And so, I appreciate this level of inquisition because it's making me think that there's a lot of opportunity to engage with HOAs in some of the tree planting goals that cities have.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention that open lands, we do a lot of state work as well. We focus on the local work, but we did just recently pass the state law here in Illinois through some open lands and collaborative advocacy for that does not allow, that prohibits HOAs from prohibiting native plantings. So that's another thing that in terms of a policy solution, if there's pushback around native plantings, Illinois now has laws that say you should be able to plant native plants in your yard, and that includes native trees, of course. Sometimes we say native planting and people don't remember that trees are plants. But so yeah, so there's a lot of tools out there too to be encouraging native plantings in the region, not only for the stormwater benefits and not heat benefits, but also for biodiversity and all the other benefits that the native plantings brings.
Thank you so much, Alma. Joel, I'm also going to help you out with one other thing. David, I know you already answered Jennifer's questions about references and resources, and we put those in the chat. Is there any other thing you want to say for Jennifer or others who are looking for resources for schoolyard greening?
Yeah, there are so many out there. And if you go to our toolkit, you're going to see there's many other partners. Center for Green Schools has a bunch of good stuff. Now the National Center on School Infrastructure, which has many topics and many buckets of information, and they just updated and improved their website, has a ton of resources there. Green Schoolyards America has some really cool stuff, including some videos. TPL. So there's so much out there that if you're at all interested in having a conversation, I'll put my email in chat. And we have folks on staff on our team that have done this much more deeply than I have, like Priya Cook, who leads our Green Schoolyards work, and Brenda Kessler, that have worked in communities all across the country. So all that is to say, there's a ton out there. So we can help narrow down what you're looking for.
Awesome. You're muted, Christopher.
I just realized that. Thank you, David. I just want to give a special shout out. One of the cool programs our schools are doing is working with a wildlife refuge to really promote wildlife refuges in not only schoolyards, but in backyards. And so I don't know if others have heard about this program, but Backyard Refuges is a program of, again, one of our a wildlife sanctuary, but also that is one of the first urban wildlife sanctuaries with formerly having an environmental justice program that they've now had to scale back. But one of those programs was these backyard refuges that are happening in neighborhoods where there aren't equitable access to green spaces. So just want to shout out that I love that schools and the wildlife refuge are working to create refuges in backyards. Joel, there was one other question, and I wanted to see, I know, David, you did your best to try to answer around how a Department of Education is being impacted, how school greening will be impacted by cuts to the Department of Education. I don't know, David or Emma, if either one of you wanted to speak to that. And Joel, I don't know if you anything else you wanted to say about impact. I know, Emma, you kind of spoke to that already about some of the impacts the current administration is having on congressional work. But Emma, anything else you want to say about school greening?
Yeah, I don't cover Department of Education specifically. My impression is that the majority of the cuts to Department of Ed we've seen so far have been just to general funding levels or federal aid and things like that. Nothing about school greening has come across my desk, but I will also say that just as for awareness for all of you, when the admin makes these cuts, they don't tell us because they know we won't like them. So there's a good chance that if you all are experiencing a funding cut, you are hearing about it before your federal representatives. So reaching out to flag that for them so that we can, reach out to the Department of Education or EPA or whoever it is and say, hey, by the way, we know that you did this and we are not supportive of it. If they're Dems and they're not supportive of it, is really helpful. So I'm not aware of any specific cuts to school greening, and that is likely by design. So.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, sorry if my response as I look at it again probably wasn't super clear, but in the written response, but um I would say there's not really much support right now for school greening out of the Department of Education. That's actually what the Revitalize America's Schoolyards Act is aiming to do. I think where the federal role has really been the last few years has been around different grants and tax incentives. So, for instance, there were several tax incentives that just got just are now gonna the deadline for them where some schools were using like HVAC systems, for example, and just using more sustainable products in school buildings that had a slew of tax incentives are now either terminated, or the dates that you need to get those by are now quicker. So in that way, what some districts were using, like Seattle, actually, that will be problematic, right? Because they were using those to help fund it. But there are other grant opportunities out there. Urban Community Forest is another one that we've been watching because that could also be used for green schoolyards projects. The community development block grants is another one that have been used, so while that I don't believe has been cut as of yet, it is something that we are really watching because those funding sources have been used for green schoolyards. So basically not really anything around Department of Education, but there's certainly been funding mechanisms that we're monitoring and worried about.
Hey, David, there's also a follow-up question from Gail in the chat, which is she knows that universities and colleges have student green funds. Do K through 12 school districts have green funds for projects?
Not that I'm aware of outside of Colorado and California now. I mean, there are still states, like I've been working in Michigan, where Michigan doesn't have any state level capital funding for schools at all for anything. So capital money at the state level is really state by state, and it isn't nearly enough. Usually school capital is funded from local bonds and things like that. So the short answer is not that I'm aware of other than California and Colorado.
Hey, Joel, because of time, I want to make a suggestion. Do we want to go through the panelists and ask if there's any call to action that they have for our participants and that we can also record?
Yeah, well, you read my mind. I was going to ask if they wanted to share any closing thoughts, but yes, just open it up to any of the panelists. If there's anything that you wanted to follow up on, or as Christopher said, a call to action that would be beneficial for this group to hear to advance your work, open open mic to do that. So just unmute and go for it.
I'll start. I just wanted to share that one of the things that came to mind after hearing everyone's presentations and why I really appreciate the topic being around local, state, and federal policy is that two things. I think one, we are really lacking an integrated approach in the US to urban forestry policy and also solving for some of these wicked problems like extreme heat. So when I say integrated, I mean having mechanisms at every level of government to support the outcomes that we wish to achieve. Like there is no policy at the federal level around growth and preservation of urban tree canopy. Like just it doesn't exist. And so I really see a lot of opportunity for us to work together, the people on this call and more to like think about what is that future of integrating policy around urban forestry, maybe in the same way that like stormwater has been integrated by the EPA. So just food for thought, things that I'm thinking about after this meeting, and just appreciate all of the people that are here. And then the second thing that I think is an opportunity is also at the local level, really getting more than just your urban forester involved in urban forestry work, like planners, architects, designers. That community of professionals is key to these outcomes. Your public works officials, your Parks and Recreation department, that like all of them have responsibility over the outcomes that we want to achieve together. So how can we bring all of those people to the table together, not just the one that is responsible for trees in your ordinance? So what I was thinking about. Thank you so much.
Really quick, I'll just go. The first call to action being what I just mentioned. If there are programs that are being cut that impact you all, make sure that your federal representatives are aware of them. One of the things that has been cut from a lot of agencies is their legislative affairs department. So communication is not fantastic right now. So that's, I mean, from my own perspective, but I think that's relatively universal. Another thing is if you all are doing projects that have dollar signs attached, I think a lot of us are pushing to fund programs related to shade and tree canopy and all these other great things we've mentioned, but we also have to come up with a number to fund them at. And I think having a justification that we can give to the appropriations committees that write those bills is really helpful rather than just pulling a number out of thin air. So if you all can say, hey, here's the impact and all of the numbers and how much it costs us and what we would like help with, things like that are really helpful. And then I think just reminding whoever represents where you all are that this is important to you year round is really, really helpful as well. Because we don't pass the funding bills in the summer. So we need them to remember this all year. So thank you.
Thank you, Emma. And it looks like Alma may have unfortunately got kicked out. Hopefully she can rejoin us. David, did you have any closing thoughts you wanted to add?
Yeah, just that local and state are still doing things, still moving, and sometimes you can get what you want quicker by working at those levels and even hyper local context like an HOA. This actually really informed me on maybe developing an HOA strategy. And then I'll just say, while we have to fight bad, terrible things happening, and at the same time holding space for positive, forward-looking policy and discussions, if nothing else, is still really important to do, both in terms to move issues forward, help stop bad things, and then some people are really engaged because something bad's happening. Some people are really engaged because they want to look forward. So having advocacy opportunities for both, I think, is really important right now.
Amazing. So I don't know if Alma's going to be able to get back in, but I just wanted to thank our panelists again for great information in the chat. So thank you for everyone who's joined us on a Friday in July and sticking with us here. And so again, in the spirit of optimism, just because there's so many life and death issues that are impacting people across the country right now. I think it's really just important for us to try to lean into optimism where we can. And even at the federal level, a reminder that in 2015, it was a Republican-led Congress that created the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, so the Urban Parks Program. When I was at TP at the time, I know Jessica is on with us and doing a lot of that work. That is really the only dedicated federal funding source for urban parks, and it's funded great projects across the country. 2020, under the first administration of the current president, we saw the American Great Outdoors Act passed, so culminating over 50 years of work to permanently and fully fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund, of which RLP is under, which again does a lot of great land and water conservation work. And then even just last year, again with the Republican House, we saw the passage of the Explore Act in a bipartisan factor, which authorized the ORLP program. And then even yesterday, last week the House, and yesterday the Senate Interior Appropriations Subcommittees did not endorse the president's budget, which would have completely eviscerated ORLP and many other programs at the Forest Service and at the Department of Interior. And so that is a ray of hope. Again, these programs are important. Republican chairs and members of the appropriations committees are recognizing the importance of these programs, as Emma mentioned, because their communities are impacted. And so as much as they're able to hear from you is great. And so, yeah, I wanted to leave with that optimism. Christopher, did you have something you wanted to add and invite for folks to join us in the working group?
Yeah, and actually Alma was able to rejoin the Zoom. Alma, did you have any closing thoughts or calls to action that you'd like to share before we close out?
Yes, so sorry. My Zoom just crashed for some reason, but thank you so much for creating this space, a really important space to bring people together around these issues. We're at Openlands, we're doing a lot of work beyond tree canopy, like I mentioned, around stormwater mitigation, around native plantings, around land conservation and biodiversity. I see huge links between all of this work. We also have some federal action alerts live right now. So we're actually asking people to take action federally around some of the issues we're seeing around open space and conservation. And you can find that on our website through our action alerts. And if you are more local to the Chicago region, there's other ways to continue being involved with our work. Right now, we're working a lot on protecting our lakefront too, our access to clean water and fresh water in the region. So I would encourage you to explore that work, and thank you again to everybody for pulling this together, for being part.
Thanks so much. And then I would be remiss here in Albuquerque. I know one of the impacts around not only extreme heat is how it impacts most impacted communities like our unsheltered communities, but also our mixed status families. And want to just remind everybody there is a statement, and I'm going to share in the chat. There's an action that you can take to support access for especially children of mixed status families to have access to outdoor spaces without fear of being detained by ICE. And so I wanted to share that, but want to also just remind you all there's an evaluation link. We would love your feedback. We're gonna be processing the 4 webinars we've done, and your feedback is always really helpful. Thank you so much to everybody who participated today. I also wanted to remind you all the webinar series, the first 3 are on the America the Beautiful for All YouTube channel. You can check those previous ones out, and this 4th one will be added. And then to reminder, if you want to join the coalition, there's a link including how to join the listserv. And of course, Joel and I would welcome anybody who wants to continue or join us in our work around the Urban Parks and Green Space Work Group at local or national, state, whatever level you're working at. We would love to have you. Joel, I'm going to pass it to you for last thoughts before we close out.
Yeah, and thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Alma, for mentioning the Action Center. The Open Lands has, American Forest also has an Action Center. I'd love to work with the working group on how we can get some of those action centers out in one place so folks can reach out to their federal representatives or at whatever level you're advocating for to make that a little bit easier for folks. And again, just from your HOA to federal agencies and the United States Senate and House of Representatives, we all can be advocating to have our communities be cooler and more livable, particularly for those who are most vulnerable. So I'll just close by thanking everybody for joining us. Thank you to our panelists who are all have the privilege of working with most of them and I know how extremely busy they are. And so I really appreciate them taking an hour and a half on a Friday and just presenting such great information in such a thorough and concise way. And again, thank all the participants for all the information in the chat. So 2 minutes early, I guess we can give you back that time, but just thank you to everybody. And as Christopher said, all 4 of the webinars are recorded. And so we will distribute more information, and we are always welcoming more folks to the America the Beautiful for All Coalition, and specifically to the Urban Parks and Green Space Working Group. So with that, we will wrap it up, and gratitude and optimism is what I'm closing with on a Friday. So thank you, everybody, and we will see you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.